generally, I think that when people say that they identify as trans, it's because in their mind they think of themselves as trans.
Right, I struggled. That's why I was on the neutral, because what does it even mean that they are trans?
Right.
Because there's no such thing as a transgender child, I can only stand here. Would you believe a child who said they were a unicorn? No, of course not. There's no such thing, and you can't be a unicorn.
Gender identity activists will tell me that I am agender, that I have the gender identity of not having a gender identity. So they agree that some people don't have a gender identity. Therefore, I mean, my position is let's extend that to everyone, because no one's been proven to have a gender identity, but I feel like we're at least on the same page that not everyone has one.
We should generally believe people when they express who they are. Move.
No.
Okay, absolutely agree and strongly disagree.
All right, so generally, which is the tone of this question, I'm going to learn about people from what they tell me. I'm not present in someone else's mind. I don't know what their lived experience is. In general, if people tell me who they are and about themselves, I'm going to believe that until I have evidence that contradicts that.
I am on strongly disagree, because I feel like that you should not abandon ever your judgment, and you should, I mean, you can open a partition in your mind and store the information they give you and be like, maybe, but at the same time, you should be forming a theory about the person based on your observations of them, and just kind of take a stance of skepticism. So you know, I work with a lot of people for my job. I'm a speech pathologist, and so I have worked with a lot of people who may have a weak grasp on reality, and they'll just tell me things that are just not accurate, and I know them to not be accurate, and so I have to kind of be aware of that. So I always have just this stance of skepticism. It's not that I actively disbelieve them, but it's just I'm just skeptical.
When I think of skepticism, I think of evaluating evidence, and so I would ask you, when you see somebody who tells you something about who they are, and it conflicts with your initial impression, do you believe that you are a better judge, or why would you believe that you're a better judge of their identity than they are when they give you that information?
I would believe that I'm a better judge of that because, well, fundamentally, I know myself, and so I've just had all this experience of feeling like, or interacting with people who have a very incorrect idea of themselves that they're promoting. Whether that's their work or whether that's my interaction with the trans community when I was trans-identifying and then after. And so I would just, I take that stance of skepticism because I don't think that a lot of people necessarily have a great deal of insight. I think everybody is kind of evolving in their understanding of themselves, myself included. But I do think that if you can establish that separate stance of skepticism, that it's will serve you.
I think self-knowledge is fantastic. To what degree do you believe that your knowledge of yourself gives you insight into other people's experience?
I believe that it gives me insight because I have had my own experience, and that can be somewhat generalized, and I understand that that's true in different directions, but I do think that there's also a gradient where some people are more self-aware and some people are less self-aware. And so if somebody is telling me something that conflicts with my life experience and my emotional process and where I was when I was younger and where I am now, that will add to the stance of skepticism that I take, especially if what they're telling me is an obvious conflict to reality.
For me, that would create a desire in myself for that to be the start of a conversation, where I would start to ask them, okay, why? I might even express, hey, there's a conflict between what I see and what you're saying. Let's talk about this because I'd like to better understand your experience, rather than projecting my beliefs and feelings onto them without that information.
I agree with that. When I say that I don't believe what they tell me, it's not that I'm actively disbelieving it. It's just a skeptical, neutral suspension of judgment and waiting for more evidence to come in to see how much their self-knowledge actually aligns with my understanding of reality.
Okay, new claim. It is possible for one to be incorrect about who one thinks one is. Move.
Simon didn't say.
Oh, we're all going over here.
Wow, so there's broad agreement on that. We should generally believe people when they express that they are trans. Move. We should generally believe adults when they say they are trans. Move. By adult, I mean anyone over the age of 18. We should generally believe children when they say they are trans. By children, let's start off with saying 16 to 18. Move. Wow. We should generally believe children from 10 to 16 when they say they are trans. Move. Okay. Could you go to strongly agree? And could you go, and you have 4.5 minutes to have a conversation.
So I am on strongly agree because trans is a religious ideology. And so when somebody says that they're part of a religious ideology, part of a subculture, I don't see a reason to disagree with them. I obviously don't agree with their position that they're the opposite sex. But if someone says that they're trans, somebody could be lying about that for some reason, so that's why I'm not on absolutely agree. But generally, I think that when people say that they identify as trans, it's because in their mind they think of themselves as trans.
Right, I struggled. That's why I was on the neutral, because what does it even mean that they are trans?
Right.
Because there's no such thing as a transgender child, I can only stand here. Because if a child says they're trans, they're wrong, they're not, because there's no such thing. They may believe themselves to be trans, I'm sure they do, but they're claiming something that is simply not real.
I'm not a religious person. I've been an atheist for a long time. And so when somebody tells me that a deity saved them by dying thousands of years ago, I'm like, that's sweet, that's quaint, but I don't think that is true. So I don't, to what extent can someone really be Christian by that logic? But if somebody tells me I'm Christian, I'm gonna make some inferences about what they probably believe and accept that identification.
Right, so when you say you would believe the child, that doesn't come with any medical implications?
Correct.
Or any...
Correct. I don't think that we should medically abuse children who belong to the subculture.
What about social transition?
No, absolutely not. Not in places of compulsory attendance. Not in. It's one thing to allow a child to choose to have short hair, or to choose to wear more masculine clothes or more feminine clothes, within reason. But by no means should they be medicalized. By no means should they be put in compression garments that constrain their growth, or be told that they are born in the wrong body. And then adults should not lie about them, should not say that they're men when they're women, or say that they're girls when they're boys, because that is psychologically abusive, and schools should be secular.
Okay.
What argument do you think would be most persuasive to someone on the neutral?
Thinking about it in terms of a religious identification, if you're willing to accept the idea that a 5-year-old could be a Christian child from a Christian family, I'm not sure what the difference is here. If you're going to accept that they have these beliefs about themselves. And for me, that's what it means to be trans. Is the only way to be trans is to believe that you're trans. So that's why I would accept it. And so, I'm not trans anymore. I thought I was trans, or I identified as trans, so I guess I was trans to the extent you can be trans, but I'm not anymore. So. But I don't think I wasn't then, just because I don't believe it now. Does that make sense? I used to be a Christian too, and I don't believe it anymore. But I don't think I wasn't a Christian then, even though people will tell me that. They'll say you were never really trans, you were never really Christian, you were never really saved, because that's how religious groups work. They don't like apostates.
Is there any argument that you think he would be susceptible, or someone in the neutral would be susceptible to move them to that position?
Well, I think I made my point clearly. There's no such thing. Would you believe a child who said they were a unicorn? No, of course not. There's no such thing, and you can't be a unicorn. My daughter has a friend who says she's a cat and goes around on all fours. She's not a cat, so I don't believe her.
So everybody reset to the neutral, please. Okay, new claim. There is a test to figure out if someone is trans. Move. Okay, new claim. There is an empirical test to figure out if someone is trans. Move. Okay, you're on the neutral. Would you step forward? And would you step forward?
So I'm standing on neutral because I don't really know of an empirical test to see if someone is trans. So that's kind of where I'm at.
So right now, in the modern meaning of the word trans, you are trans if you say you are trans. It's self-declaration. It cannot be questioned. Gender-affirming care is based upon this as well, that if someone says they are trans, and that goes all the way down to a 2-year-old, all the way up to however old. So that's it. There's no biological marker, there's no possible test. I almost stood here because there's one type, most of the men who identify as women and seek medical body modification are autogynephilic, which means they're aroused by the fantasy of becoming women, having female body parts. There is a test for that. It's called phallometry, and it measures arousal. It's a pressure device that they put on the penis, and it can measure his arousal. So he can be reading something like little scenarios where he's putting on mascara or putting on a skirt and he gets aroused. So there is a test for autogynephilia, but there's no test for having an internal sense of gendered self.
If I'm not saying this is the definition, and I'm not asking you to accept this definition, but if the definition was like a person who is gender A feels as if they are gender B, I guess there wouldn't be a test there.
I'll step in.
Yeah.
What would a test look like so that an independent, no dog in the fight, someone who's just interested in evidence, what would a test look like that where we could go, oh, that person has a trans brain? Like what kind of a test could they, like, is there a test to see if somebody is, quote, born in the wrong body? Oh, we have identified a female brain and a male body.
Well, there you go. That's always been my thing. There's this brain sex theory where trans-identified people will claim to have a female brain in a male body. And yet I don't believe they truly believe it, because none of them support brain scans as a diagnostic test for gender-affirming treatments. I think these autogynephilic men are heterosexual men, and they're very masculine men. They would never, on a brain scan, show a feminine brain, a female brain. Impossible. They have a typically masculine everything. So they would never qualify, so that's why they don't support the brain scan.
Would that test, the result, hypothetical, if that test, that brain scan came back and there was like a significant difference, would that change your mind?
You'd have to control for sexuality. So we do have they use these really flawed studies to say that there's a trans brain that's born in the wrong body. So they will show some men who think they're women who have more typically female brains, but they did not control for sexuality. And homosexual men will skew more towards the female brain. You would have to be able to separate, make sure you're not catching homosexual people and that you're finding the trans brain, and there is no such test.
If there was a way to control for that test, is that a test, and it was done to your satisfaction, there was no other flaws in it, would that change your mind?
It's possible it would, but I would also have to see that, so say you're finding female brains in male people, all of those people would have to identify as transgender and seek medical transition. Because if you've got a split between, some of them are happy with their female brain in their male body and they're living as feminine men, and others want to transition, you still haven't got a diagnostic test for the transgender brain.
Okay, so is there anything that was said here that would cause you to move either way?
No, because the claim was there is an empirical test, and what I'm hearing is hypothetical speculation for could there be a test. If there was a test, or if somebody made a good case that there was a test, that might make me move.
New claim, human brains can be categorized as more or less male-like and female-like. Move. Okay, would you step up to the agree and step up to the absolutely disagree and have a conversation?
So I believe that male and female brains do exist, but I think that it's a binary state. You either are a male brain, and that's you're in a male body of male genetics, male developmental history, or you're a female brain in a female body, female developmental history. I think trying to reify that and say that there's more and less female-like is missing the point, and that's a different level of analysis in terms of masculinization and feminization, and that can happen in either sex based on past hormone exposure or based on other genetic things. But I don't think that that's making them more or less male-like, because I think that maleness is you either are or aren't.
Okay, I wish I had the numbers in my mind. I can't remember. But is it not true that a brain scan can accurately identify a male or female brain about 95% of the time? Is that?
Yeah. Brains are sexually dimorphic, definitely,
right.
Based on the Y chromosome has genes that control growth independent of testosterone. So regardless of your hormone history, the male brain is going to be structurally different from the female brain. Whether they converge functionally is another question, but in terms of the structural maleness, that's set at conception.
So don't you agree then with this?
I don't think that a brain that's less masculinized is less male.
I think I've misunderstood the claim. Give me the claim again.
So the claim was human brains can be categorized as more or less male-like and female-like.
Right, you see, I was understanding it more or less. It's more or less male, more or less female, which means it's pretty much male, approximately female.
Yeah, I think maleness is a set.
But there's no,
that has a range in it.
There's a male brain, and it cannot be more male or less male.
Yeah,
so
that's
I'm in the wrong
position.
place. Am I in the wrong place?
Okay, I don't know, you tell me.
I think I'm in
Possibly.
the wrong place.
But it's interesting, so you moved, but you guys moved in her direction.
I'm examining my epistemology about this as I speak. The reason I went to disagree was I've never heard of the concept of male brain or female brain in terms of sexual dimorphism. Sierra had a lot of good information that sounded well informed. Of course, the question is, why would Sierra's information be more compelling to me than Mia's information about WPATH? And I think I'm passing it through my filters, and she sounded convincing that there is sexual dimorphism between male brains and female brains. Based on being convinced by that argument, that made me agree more that there were male-like and female-like brains.
Okay, let's do this claim. It is possible for a brain to be more or less male-like or female-like. It is possible for a brain to be more or less male-like or female-like. Move.
I'm going here. I'm not entirely sure I understand.
Okay, let's do this one. There is an empirical test to figure out if a male has a female-like brain. Move. And you guys are still in the neutral?
Yeah.
Okay. If a male has a female-like brain, they are by definition trans. So why don't you go back and why don't you come up and have a conversation.
Sure. I guess this comes back to what the definition of trans really means. And I'm not sure, I mean, from definitions I've heard, I'm not entirely sure exactly what that means or what definition we could possibly go with. But yeah, I don't know if it comes back down to something in the brain or a feeling, or I don't really know.
Right, so actually probably what's going on with the man who has a female typical brain is he's homosexual. That's normally the case.
How do we know that?
We know that homosexual men, their brain skews far more to the female typical brain, which is why the early studies, when they thought they'd found the trans brain, they didn't control for sexuality. So those studies are worthless because
That's
most
what
of
you
those.
meant before. Okay, I understand what you
Right.
said earlier now. How could we know if it
What
was...
did you, I'm sorry, what did you understand now that you didn't before?
When she said they didn't control for sexuality, I was a little bit confused by that.
Okay.
But now that's crystal clear. So thank you for
Yeah, and
restating that.
so tell me what your understanding is now that you didn't have before.
So when she said they were like, they found the trans brain and they didn't control for sexuality, they didn't take into account that the person might be homosexual.
Okay.
And that's what
That's correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that would skew the results?
That's what she's saying, I believe, yes.
Right, so I just want, okay, now, okay, go ahead.
Okay. And how could we determine if it's a homosexual brain or a trans brain? Like,
Again, we're back to I don't believe that we can. I mean, you can know the person's sexuality. You just have to ask, but I don't believe there is a trans brain. It's difficult to talk about because I don't have a clear definition of trans in my mind. Trans means many, many different things, and they all have different brain makeup, different brain structures.
my apologies. I think it was a loaded question because I assumed that I thought that you thought that earlier test for the homosexual brain was a valid test. I think you're saying that it's not a valid test?
We can see homosexual men do typically have more female typical brains. That's a thing. And that's what skews the trans studies that suggest they found the trans brain, is that they did not control for sexuality. So say most of the men were gay men and they found that these men had female brains. It's not a trans brain that they found, it's a homosexual brain. And then as well, many will take hormones and they don't control for that either. So hormones will affect the brain as well.
I guess I'm a little confused on how you determined that the homosexual brain, that test for that was a valid test, like, you know, versus the trans brain. I'm just unclear, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, homosexuality it's an objective reality, first of all. You can define homosexuality. We all understand what that means, a person who is attracted to members of the same sex. Trans gets very complicated very quickly because nobody can actually define what is trans. So you're already grounded in something measurable, and then they can see.
Okay,
I don't think it's
we're out of time.
precise. Okay.
Everybody go back to the mats in the middle of the neutral, please. New claim. For someone to be gay requires self-identification as gay. Move. For someone to be gay requires self-identification as gay. Two minutes.
So basically, I just think that people can be closeted, including to themselves, and not be ready or able to admit to themselves that that's the pattern, and that it's not going to change.
I agree with you. And the only reason I'm on slightly agree rather than on absolutely agree is just looking at the nuances and the definitions of what gay means. Is somebody who's closeted, I guess by saying closeted, we're saying they're gay. right?
Yeah.
Are there people who are gay who then don't discover that, or I don't know. My thoughts are confused on this. But I think we agree, and we're just. I'm again taking the skeptical position where I'm not asserting that I know everything about that. So I might actually move over a pad or two.
You're free to move.
Yeah, I'll move over to disagree.
So correct me if I'm wrong, if my thinking about this is incorrect, but the same test that Mia talked about, you put a device on the penis and you see if it gets erect when you show them certain things. Mm-hmm. So if you showed a man that when he watched other men or gay pornography or something and he got an erection, and you showed a man that when he looked at women doing whatever they're doing and he didn't, wouldn't that be a test or no?
I mean, if I could share personal testimonial, I don't hate gay porn, but I have experimented with being with men, and I don't enjoy having sexual relations with men, and I don't really enjoy having romantic relationships with men. So I'm not gay, but I do get aroused by gay porn, so I don't think that's a valid test.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think that there's the issue of mirror neurons where you're going to fire when you feel yourself stimulating yourself, or when you see somebody else being stimulated. I think that there's a natural arousal that just happens. So I'm skeptical. I think there's the factor of how self-controlled a person is. Are they going to be able to resist that reaction to it? And I also think that there's a difference between arousal from imagery or from paraphilia or fetish versus your orientation. The sex you're oriented towards, you're not going to be interested in most members of that sex. You're just not. That's just how it works. So that's what's different between something like a paraphilia, which is going to arouse you every time you see it. So I think that I don't know exactly what that test is measuring.
Yeah, if there is a test for gay, I don't think that's it.
All right, new claim. Could you go back to the neutral, please? For someone to be trans requires self-identification as trans. Move.
I feel I should stop being so extreme.
Nah, it's the best way to be.
All right, new claim. Self-identification should be the only criterion to know if someone is trans. Move. Or you can stay on the neutral. Self-identification should be the only criterion to know if someone is trans. Wow, everybody's on the neutral. Really? Everybody's on the neutral except you. Okay, Mia, could you come to the neutral? And could you come to the agree? Why are you on the neutral? Tell him.
I need more information, that's all. If we're doing self-ID as the criterion for which somebody can progress with medical transition, then I would be on the absolutely disagree. If it's just an identity, then I'll probably stand with you.
And why are you there?
My assumption is what you're saying, that it's just identity. My belief is that we should believe what people tell us about themselves, but I would agree, I would need more information to support medical care.
And as well, if there's any question of spaces, self-ID, if a man self-identifies as a woman, and that's to give him access to women's spaces, I'm over there again.
Okay, all right, so we're gonna reset, go back to the neutral, we're gonna reset for a new claim. Everyone possesses a gender identity. Move.
Wow, I'm really...
You can remain on the neutral if you want. Could we have you go to the slightly agree? And could we have you go to the absolutely disagree? Okay, so have a conversation.
So I'm on absolutely disagree, because even gender identity activists will tell me that I am agender, that I have the gender identity of not having a gender identity. So they agree that some people don't have a gender identity. Therefore, I mean, my position is let's extend that to everyone, because no one's been proven to have a gender identity, but I feel like we're at least on the same page that not everyone has one. That's where I'm at.
Okay, yeah, I get that. I think they identify too, just like everybody's kind of a product of their environment a lot of the time. So like a lot of people were raised differently and whatnot. And so even if they, like you said, like they disagree with the gender identity, they still identify as either male or female in that, and I feel like that's where I slightly agree.
Yeah, I think I would just see that as like describing reality. So I feel like gender identity as a concept exists to explain people not wanting to accept their reality and wanting to be something they're not. So I think that to the extent it exists, it's just fundamentally a belief system, but not everybody shares that belief system.
I feel like that's the gray area in all of it, is that's concept, which not everybody can fully grasp. I agree with that.
Did anybody say anything there would cause you to move to neutral or cause you to move to strongly disagree?
I'd probably move to neutral.
Well, it's a free country in a free state of Florida. Okay, anybody say anything to cause you to move in either way?
I think so. I would probably go further to strongly disagree.
What caused you to move?
Because I kind of agree with her that it's just like it only exists to explain why some people don't feel like they're part of their own like sex. Yeah, I like me personally, I don't have a gender identity. I feel, well, I am a woman. So like it's not like I think I'm a woman or I believe I'm one.
You are a woman.
I am a woman, yes.
Okay, great. Everybody go back to the neutral, please. New claim. The concept of gender identity is required to fully explain the phenomenon of trans. Move. Okay, come to the agree. Okay, Mia, come to the absolutely disagree. Have a conversation.
I just think you can't say you're trans unless you believe in gender identity. So like the whole concept is just based on if your gender identity doesn't match your biological sex. So if you don't believe in that, well then you don't believe in trans people, period.
Right, that is true. The modern concept rests on gender identity, but prior to the creation of this concept of gender identity, there were people who wished to become members of the opposite sex. They were called transsexuals. So I think the concept of trans, the entire concept of trans would be better off without gender identity. If we could look at who these people really are, who make sense of their lives through the label of transgender, without the oversimplification of this gendered soul, we'd be able to help them much better.
But what would explain why those people, before this whole ideology came about, wanted this transition? Or not even a transition? I don't even know. Like, how would you explain that?
The groups would have been autogynephilic men. These are men who they have a paraphilia in which they're aroused by the fantasy of becoming women. So it's different from transvestites who are aroused by the clothing. These men want to become women. So that's your first group, that's most of them. And then there would be extremely gender nonconforming homosexuals, probably just living in a homophobic world that could not accept their sexuality, and they wanted a medical escape. And so they're more comfortable living as members of the opposite sex. Those were the two main groups prior to the whole social contagion now. You can see them more clearly if you take away the concept of the gender identity. I think the trans movement loves the concept of the gender identity and pushes it very strongly because they deliberately want to deny the existence of autogynephilia. So gender identity, it's far more sanitized. I just have a female essence within me, not I've been masturbating, wearing women's clothing for 4 decades, and now I want to become a woman. It's just a more sanitized version.
I think that's a pretty interesting point. So like from your perspective, if we looked at it from that perspective, we could help them somehow, I guess, yeah.
I do believe if a doctor is treating a medical treatment, a very radical medical treatment based upon a gender identity, which doesn't technically exist, it's just an oversimplification of psychiatry, they're not treating the patient, they're treating a concept that doesn't exist.
Could I ask you to step back? And Sierra, could I ask you to move forward?
So the reason that I'm on absolutely disagree for this one is because I don't think that the concept explains anything. I don't think it's needed to explain the phenomenon of people having a belief system that causes them to want to self-harm. I think that there have been other religious movements that have involved mutilation of genitalia. Skopsy is the classic example, which is a Russian Christian sect that was engaged in breast removal, penis removal, and other interventions, but they had a whole different explanation of why they were engaged in this. I think that there's underlying reasons why some people want to go after their own sensitive body parts, and that the modern concept of gender identity was invented to kind of reify that, as well as to sell people on the idea that well, this is just a permanent state for you. Your beliefs will never change. Your self-perception will never change. But fundamentally, I've found that in talking to them, they're often not. They've never considered things like, well, what about a woman who is who's brain dead but she's still alive? Does she have a gender identity? Does she have an internal self-concept? No, but she's still a woman. So does she stop being trans at that point? They would say no, because they say that even corpses are trans. So it's just, I feel like it's something that they've made up in order to sell something, and I don't think it's necessary to explain why people want to do this.
Do you have any questions at all for her?
I basically agree with her, but I do think that we have to acknowledge that this gender identity concept exists, because otherwise you can't really explain how kids today are viewing themselves. I feel like they're growing up in this environment with this concept of gender identity. You know what I mean? So it has to exist for the sake of the modern trans movement. But I actually agree with you overall. I think it's not real. I personally don't think it exists, but I think you have to accept that it's a way that people are currently framing their own reality. So for them, it is real. That's kind of how I view it.
So are you confident that placement on the mat is where you should be?
Yeah.
Is anybody saying anything? Have you heard any arguments to cause you to move either way?
I mean, I'd probably go this way. Yeah.
As I think about it, I've been thinking about moving.
To free state of Florida, you're welcome to move if you want. I'm not going to tell you to move.
It's more my internal dialogue than listening to this, but I think I've thought of things that, in response to some of these arguments, I think that.
Okay, and what caused you to move?
That she's right, with the modern trans movement, the idea of that, is what is pretty much being pushed in everybody's faces, whether, we like it or not. So I think the idea of it needs to be acknowledged.